Hello and welcome to this video and to August's book review. I feel, fingers crossed, that I might have my reading mojo back a bit. I feel like the concentration's back a bit, and also now that we've announced that I'm pregnant I can explain why I've had trouble reading recently, and that is obviously attention span and just severe tiredness from the first trimester. But now that I have gone into the second trimester, my energy levels have increased or improved a little bit. So I feel like reading has got back to roughly where it was before, which is good news because it was quite upsetting that I couldn't concentrate and read for as long as I wanted to. So I do have 5 books to talk to you about today. We may as well jump right in. Also, I was on holiday for like 2 weeks from work, so that might also be why I've read a bit more than before, because I haven't had as much to do. So reading has become like an important bit and something that I focused on quite a bit during that time. But anyway, the first book I read was Parenting Hell. This is by Beckett and Widdicombe. It's the book that accompanies the podcast, which I love and I listen to, and I've listened to all of the episodes of so far. If you saw last month's book review, you'll know that I said I wanted like a palette cleanser in between the Scythe series and then completing the Cursebreaker series, and that was this book. And obviously, as I've alluded to, I'm pregnant, so parenting is a subject matter I'm kind of interested in at the moment. But I bought this book before we knew I was pregnant, purely because I enjoy the podcast and it was going relatively cheap in the works. I thought this book was enjoyable, it was funny, there are some good stories in it. Obviously you take their advice and stuff with a pinch of salt, because, you know, it's their opinion and they are comedians, so they are gonna do things for that effect. I would say though that I feel like a lot of the stories in this book have already been mentioned on the podcast. Now I don't know whether if I got this on release date whether I would have thought the same thing, but certainly coming to it, say 6 months to a year after they first published this, I had heard most of the stories that are in it, which was a little disappointing. I would have liked something a bit newer to enjoy while I was reading this. As I said, it does say on the front of this 100% no advice guaranteed. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the tips are overly helpful, maybe, but it is sort of a reassuring book that nobody really knows what they're doing and everyone's sort of winging it, which is helpful for a soon-to-be first-time parent, because quite frankly I don't know what I don't know, and I don't know a lot, so it's reassuring that everyone's in the sort of same boat at that point and they all muddle through and it works out well in the end, kind of thing. And this is the book I read sort of the tail end of my first trimester, so I was still a bit tired, and it works out really well because the chapters are really short. So if you are a parent, it's quite easy to dip in and out of, or if like me you are struggling with low energy and just severe tiredness, then it's quite easy, as I said, to dip in and out as well. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a good palette cleanser in between the sort of 2 fantasy series that I'd read and planned to read, and helped me get back that sort of reading mojo. So that was Parenting Hell by Beckett and Widdicombe. Apologies for the glare that's been all over that one. It's a very shiny cover. So as I've mentioned and as I've alluded to, I then went on and finished the Cursebreaker series. So I started obviously with the second book. I have already read A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. So I moved on to the second book, which is A Heart So Fierce and Broken. And it took me a little while to get into this. I really enjoyed Brigid Kemmerer's writing style, that wasn't the issue. The issue I had was that we weren't following our main characters from the first one. So our main characters in this one are Gray and Liamara, who Gray is in the first book but he doesn't get any chapters, and Liamara is an entirely new character. So it felt weird going into a sequel of a book, certainly when I really enjoyed the first one, to then not be following the characters that you expect to be following. But saying that, in the end I probably preferred Gray and Liamara. Is that something I'm allowed to say? So I did enjoy this book a lot. This doesn't have the sort of Beauty and the Beast retelling element that the first one did. It's very much its own story, and we're going on a big journey in this one, which I liked. I liked the travel elements to it. I enjoyed the camaraderie between our sort of group of travellers a lot. So Gray and Liamara are joined by 3 others, I think, 3 or 4 others. I won't name them because I don't want to spoil anything, and how that develops and comes together is very interesting as well. So that's the sequel, and then I went straight into the 3rd and final of the series, and it's A Vow So Bold and Deadly, again by Brigid Kemmerer. I actually read this in about 4 days, so this is where my annual leave came into its own, because I didn't have huge amounts of time between not being at work and then going on holiday where I wanted to take my Kindle, so I really had to make sure I got about 100 pages of this read a day, which I managed, and that's why I'm really happy with how my reading's gone this month. We are back with all 4 characters this time, so we have Gray and Liamara from the 2nd book, but we also have Harper and Wren, who are the main characters in the 1st, and it's nice having all of the people back together. I would say, and I think I am unusual, but Liamara was my favourite. I find her very intelligent, very empathetic, and just far more interesting to read from, and the way that her mind works compared to the others. But being back with all of them is what I liked about this book, although saying that Wren is probably my least favourite character. Now, I don't know whether it's just because this is written by a woman or because I am a woman, but the chapters from the 2 women were the ones I preferred. And that might also be because their chapters were less about the politics, or less about the war, less about fighting, less angst, which are never my favourite things in a book, so maybe that's why. So this is a fantasy, and in a lot of fantasies they focus on sort of the politics of things, the politics of nations and stuff like that, alliances, etc, etc. This one is quite heavy on the politics compared to, say, A Heart So Fierce and Broken or A Coast So Dark and Lonely, although there are elements of that in both. This one is more heavily focused on that, and I didn't think I'd enjoy it, but I was invested enough that I could get along with that side of things, which is normally the thing that puts me off fantasy books. And I think because of the way that the relationships develop in this book between all of our characters, even our side characters, that's why that sort of political part of it, I don't know, I've got something in my throat, so I keep coughing. Is that better? So I don't know if that's why the political parts of it were more enjoyable, because it led into some of that relationship building, which was really important to this book and the side that I really did enjoy. The only issue that I had with this is that the ending didn't actually seem to conclude anything. There are still a lot of open questions, and as far as I'm aware, this is just a trilogy. So this is the last of the books, and it should have wrapped everything up. But there are still lots of things that I'm unsure about, and questions that I had that weren't closed off. So I don't know whether it's like that so that Brigid Kemmerer could come and revisit if she ever wanted to. But it does frustrate me that I've read the trilogy and there are still things that I question. Which I don't think there should be, particularly if it is just a trilogy and we're not getting any more books, and yeah. So all in all, I really enjoyed the Cursebreaker series. I would recommend that one over the Scythe series. It's a lot more accessible, a lot easier to read, and I prefer Brigid Kemmerer's writing style to Neil Schusterman. So if you are going to pick one fantasy series, that would be the one that I would recommend. So I then went on holiday, so I went and read things on my Kindle. So I read The Reading List by Sara, Nisha Adams. This is a book about, how do I explain it? So this is what they would call one of those uplifting reads that I tend not to find uplifting, and spoiler, I didn't with this one. But it focuses on our 2 main characters, whose names have escaped me. One is a sort of 17-year-old girl. She has a summer job in the library, and the other is a older 70-plus-year-old Indian man who's a widow and finds some solace in books. So the reading list very much is a love letter to books. It is split into sections depending on different more classic books, because our main female protagonist finds a reading list which she then uses to recommend books to the elderly gentleman, and how their lives intertwine with these books and kind of stuff like that, and the stuff that's going on outside as well. I haven't explained that very well. If you're interested, read the blurb, it will do a better job than I have. I found this to be quite a love letter to books, which is something I enjoyed as a book reader, and the fact that they can be really good escapism if you're going through certain things, or they can really talk to certain parts of your life. Obviously there are books that come into your life at exactly the right moment, and that's why you love them. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is The Quiet Kind of Thunder. It came at perfectly the right point for me, and I absolutely loved it because of that. But it can also bring people together. So I mean, BookTube is a huge example of that. I mean, a community has developed just around the love of books. So the reading list really does feed into all of that kind of stuff. And it has made me want to use my library card a bit more. As you know, I went and got it. I haven't used it since, so maybe I need a trip. But as you can see, I've got a lot of books to read, so yeah. So as I mentioned, this is split into sections depending on the books that are on the reading list. There are, I think, 9 books in total that they mention in this, and I've read 4 of them. And although I don't think you need to have read all of them to understand this at all, I certainly didn't find that. Of the ones that I didn't read, I wish that I had read Rebecca and Little Women, because they are spoken about a lot in terms of different plots and stuff like that, but I didn't quite get the references that they were referring to because I haven't read the books. Although with the Little Women one I have seen the film, so I got it a little bit more, but Rebecca was a bit more of a unknown for me because I've never read or watched that. And I would say it's a little bit spoilery. If you don't know anything about these books, then it might be worth not reading this, because it does give some stuff away and maybe some of the bigger plot points. But because a lot of these books are older, we're talking like To Kill a Mockingbird, Rebecca, Pride and Prejudice. Some of the newer ones are probably Life of Pi, Kite Runner, Time Traveller's Wife, but because they are very well known, a lot of it I already knew, even though I haven't read some of the books, just because that's what happens throughout sort of life and kind of things, you pick up on stuff. But if you do know nothing about them, I would probably recommend steering clear of this book if you are interested in those, because it will give you some spoilers for what's going on in those books. I feel like that was a bit rambled, but I hope that made sense. And lastly, I found that the ending was a little bit rushed. Sort of 3/4, maybe even a bit further, we went through a really emotional part of the book that I just wasn't expecting. It sort of came out, not quite out of the blue, but it was a bit of a jolt in where the story was, and it did make me quite emotional. I can't really say what it is without giving away massive spoilers, and I've just spoken about that. So we had that event, and then we sort of ended, and it felt a little bit rushed in between. So I don't know whether that event either needed to not be in the book or whether we needed that a little bit earlier, but that's my opinion on it. So that's The Reading List by Sara and Nisha Adams. The last book that I read, and I finished this morning, was Body Language by A.K. Turner. This is a thriller mystery, and our main character, Cassie, she is a mortuary technician, I think that's the terminology. And it says on the blurb that she can, like, the dead people speak to her. So when an old important teacher is her, you know, body on the mortuary slab, she does what she can to try and solve how this woman came to be there. I wouldn't say it's a particularly tense thriller, this one, it's more of a mystery, but I liked that, and I also liked the sort of forensic police procedure parts of it because of it. And I found that her being someone that works in a mortuary really interesting and not something that is shown often, and a really interesting setting, and it makes sense why her and the police were talking and etc etc etc, but there were a lot of rules that are broken by her and the police, and I'm not sure that is quite as accurate, but I let it slide because it was entertaining. The story itself I found that very interesting. I didn't quite see where things were going. I wasn't quite sure what the outcome was going to be, and I enjoyed how it ended out. And it is I think this is another series, so I would be open to reading it, and it has been left open like that. 2 points. The gift that is mentioned on the blurb I wouldn't say is particularly used, which I was a little bit disappointed about because that was what sort of drew me to the book. Although I did really enjoy it, I was a little bit disappointed that there was not more of her talking to dead people, but hey ho. And also, trigger warnings, there are some very descriptive sections of her completing postmortems and, you know, slicing bodies and looking at organs and stuff. So if you're squeamish in that kind of way, then maybe this isn't the book for you. But overall, I did really enjoy it. I'm now going to rush to end this video because I haven't got a lot of time left on my memory card. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.